Bass guitar. So I've been meaning to do this video for a while, but it's sort of got lost on the to-do list. I was reminded today by a conversation I heard in my group session, some people talking about the differences between a normal electric guitar and a bass guitar. Wasn't entirely correct what they were saying, so I thought just to avoid confusion I'd make the video try and clear a few things up. So I've just been playing a little riff on the bass guitar. What I heard today was somebody said to another person the difference between a bass guitar and a normal guitar is that a normal guitar's got 6 strings, a bass guitar's got 4 strings. In this example, with my guitars, I've done a video on my electric guitar, it's got 6 strings, this has got 4 strings. So in this example, that's true, that is a difference, but that's not really the difference between the two instruments. A guitar can have more than 6 strings, a different number of strings, and so can a bass guitar. Nowadays you might have 5, 6, 7, 8 strings even on either instrument, depending on what type of instrument you want to get, what type of genre you're playing. So I'm going to clear up the explanation of the bass guitar, how it's different from a normal guitar, and what's similar and what's different. So the string thing aside, forget how many strings it's got. 9 out of 10 times you'll see, probably you're watching another band playing, traditionally bass guitars tended to have 4 strings. A lot of them have 5 nowadays, but more often than not it's 4, so that was correct in a way. Same with the normal electric guitar and acoustic guitar. Acoustics almost always have 6 strings, apart from something called a 12 string, which is a totally different animal. But with electric guitars, again, 6 strings, 7 string, even 8 strings now you can buy. So don't worry too much about the amount of strings on the instrument. When you're looking at this guitar now, this bass guitar, one thing that should be noticeable, and you've probably seen it on the wall with other guitars before, it's a lot longer between the headstock and the bridge of the guitar. So between this hand and this hand, where I am now, what we call the scale length is a lot longer, and that results in the instrument being a lot longer than a conventional guitar. The reason for that basically is it's for tuning reasons. We're using thicker strings, and by doing so, having a longer scale helps us to be able to keep in tune throughout the entire stretch of the frets right up the neck. It's a bit of a complicated thing, but it's for tuning reasons, is a simple explanation. So apart from the scale length, the other main difference on a bass guitar is the tuning. I'm talking about standard tuning now. On a normal guitar I've talked about standard tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E. On a bass guitar we've got the same tuning. On this guitar I've got E, A, D, G. So we've got 4 strings. I haven't got the B and the E, the high strings. But they're not tuned the same, they're tuned 1 octave lower. So the E string on this guitar is tuned 1 octave lower than the E string on the ordinary guitar, if we call it that. What that means is, if I play the E string on this guitar and that pitch, to get that same note on this guitar I need to play the 12th fret, the octave, to get that same note. So the entire instrument is tuned a full octave lower than a guitar, which is why the bass sounds deeper, meatier, beefier, bassier even, if you will. That's the main difference. It adds a lot more low end to the overall sound of the music if you're playing with a band or if you're playing with a guitar player. So with that being said, it's longer, it's tuned differently, the strings are thicker. What does that mean to playing it? I'm not a bass player myself, I'm a guitar player. The reason I have a bass there is just mainly so that if I want to record a backing track for students or something like that has a bass part on it, I can put a bass part on it, but I'm in no means am I a bass player. It is a different technique. But the difference mainly is it's probably 3 things. I mentioned the string gauge. Because we've got the longer scale length, the entire thing is longer. There's more of a stretch between the frets. So if you were to play four notes, one per fret, on a bass guitar, that's going to be more of a stretch on your fretting hand than what it is on an ordinary electric or acoustic guitar, just because the entire thing is longer. Because it's longer, and also because the strings are a heavier gauge, normally you'll also find that it's physically more difficult to play. It's not any more complicated, but actually dealing with the strings that are heavier and fatter, they take a little bit more pressure to put down, combined with the stretch, because the frets are further apart, that tends to make them more difficult to play. So that's the difference between, in terms of actually playing it with your hands. Technique wise, how do you play it? It's almost the same, it's more or less the same. You're fretting hand, you're still making notes, using the frets to make notes. Chords as well, you can use chords on a bass just the same as on a guitar. A lot of people, when they're starting out, they don't realise that, they think the bass is just single notes, but chords play quite a big part in bass guitar when you're an experienced bassist. Well, I'm not. I was just playing single notes before. You can play chords as well. With your picking hand, your strumming hand, there's a variety of different things you can do, and there's some things on the bass guitar that you don't normally do on the normal guitar. So on the normal guitar, you've got the choice of the plectrum, so I can play with the plectrum what I was playing before. Do that with the plectrum. Do it with my fingers, just like I was finger picking on the guitar. So those two methods are fairly standard. In addition to that, on the bass guitar, and again, I'm not a bass player, so I can't really do this with any degree of proficiency, but you sometimes see bass players doing things like slapping the strings with the thumb to get a bit more attack on the thing, and even plucking the strings away from the instrument to get that type of a sound that you don't normally use on a standard guitar. The strings on this are thicker, they'll take that type of punishment. On a normal guitar, you might end up breaking the strings, or it just probably won't sound as good. I know there's some players that do that on a regular guitar, it's great, but it's not normal to do that, so those tend to be normal bass techniques. Another thing they use is using fingers using 2 fingers or 3 fingers to sound the notes by picking in that sort of a technique. You'll see that commonly if you watch any bass player that uses finger style. So those are the playing techniques. The rest of it is pretty much the same as a normal guitar. The electronics on this are the same as the electric guitar, more or less. We've got the pickups, these two black rectangles here with the dots on. They pick up the sound and they send it. One thing to watch out with on a bass guitar, because it's longer, you can easily bump it into stuff like I just did. Be aware. It sends it down the cable, down to the amplifier to make it sound. If I didn't have an amplifier on this, switch the amplifier off, because it's lower pitched, you get very little natural volume out of the guitar. You probably won't hear it very much at all. So the actual overall volume level, because the pitch is lower, the strings are thicker, it doesn't sound as well. So typically with an electric bass, you need to play it through an amplifier to be able to hear it properly, or even at all. The other things, because we've got these 2 pickups, on the other guitars that I've described in my other video explaining, I'll put a link below, they've got a little switch on that lets me switch between these pickups. This guitar doesn't have that. It's got a slightly different system. What it's got is this arrangement of knobs. These 2 knobs on the top control the volume for each of the pickups. So this pickup has got its own volume control. This pickup has got its own volume control. So I can turn this pickup from full volume to silent independently. I can turn this pickup from full volume to silent. If you watch the other video, the difference between the pickups gives you different sound depending on the neck or the bridge pickup. This particular setup allows you to blend the two pickups and choose how much of this pickup you want to hear and how much of that pickup. You might have one completely up, one completely down, vice versa, or you might have a combination between the two depending on the type of sound or the type of tone that you're trying to achieve. The other two knobs, like on the other guitar I mentioned, there's a tone control that affects, basically it backs off a little bit of the treble, makes the thing a little bit less harsh and a little bit less sharp in your ear. There's a tone control for each of the pickups, so that one's got a volume and a tone, that one has got a volume and a tone. Not all basses are set up this way. You might find some with a switch, a different amount of knobs. That's just the way this particular instrument is set up. Final word, I did mention that you need to really play through an amplifier. I just used a little tiny little practice amplifier, probably the smallest one you can get. I was using before, very simple piece of equipment. It's not normally a good idea to play a bass guitar through a normal guitar amplifier, because it's producing lower pitched tones. You can cause damage, particularly to the speakers in the amplifier, if you're not careful. If you're playing really quietly, you probably get away with it, but it's not good practice. If you start cranking it up more, there's a good chance you could damage the amplifier. So for a bass, you really need, in a perfect world, a proper bass amplifier. You can do it the other way around. You can play a normal electric guitar through a bass amplifier without damaging it. It probably won't sound great, but you're not going to damage the amplifier. But my advice is don't try and play a electric bass guitar through a conventional normal guitar amplifier, because you might end up harming it. So that's the bass guitar. It's not that much different. The key thing to bear in mind, it's tuned one octave lower, and normally it's got a longer scale length, so everything's a bit longer and the strings are a bit heavier. Bass guitar.